So you can see my screen, right? All good. Right. So I've got what I call, or not what actually, it is what it is, what they call a value creation process. So it's got so many lines, but at the end of the day, all of them make sense. Now, why is this important as part of unpacking document 1? Because now the question is, and maybe let me put it to you, and just maybe hear your thoughts before we jump in. If you are to just say to someone how they should be engaging with document 1 or understanding an industry, what kind of advice will you give them? Maybe let me hear your thoughts first. So I'm saying that you've now passed. You are now sitting March 2023. You are now just waiting for SAICA to sign you off and allow you to register as a member. And now an aspiring CA comes to you and say, I never understand what I need to do with document 1. And I just want to hear maybe an advice. What is your approach? How do you then engage with document 1, the one that gives an overview of what? An overview of the industry. Does it matter whether the company is listed or unlisted? Does it matter whether it's in industry A or in industry B? Like, how is generally your approach? What are the elements that you will then expect someone to focus on? And why is that? How do you think about it so that we understand maybe what SAICA is looking to do with this particular document? What if you find on the 9th of December, it's not there? Will it be a train smash? What is then the general idea with document 1 for you? And how do you go about just getting value out of it? Anyone maybe to share their thoughts? I would like to hear you talk, everyone. Please, I think I saw you wanted to say something. Please go for it. I use document 1 to help me with business acumen and evaluating the decisions we want to take against it. That's my view in summary. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? So the first response, just to help with business acumen and evaluating the decisions that we want to take against it. Okay, sure. Anyone, what is the value of document 1 for you, and how do you go about unpicking it? Those are my questions. You're not gonna keep quiet on me, right?
Hi, Randami.
Good evening.
For me, on document 1, before this year, when I wrote last year, I never used to do industry research. I always used to get it from other people because I didn't understand what exactly I was supposed to use the document for. But then this year, during the course of the program and going through my responses and the responses from the markers, that's when I started noticing that that document can set you in between getting a BC and a C. the information that is in that document, how you have understand the business model, how you've understand the strategies that they are using. And it also helps you in terms of some of the things that would have been noted happening in the industry that you may need to have an extra look at. It's a matter of just Googling and then finding out the information about it. But then now I understand the importance of that document. Before I never used to do industry research, but now I know that it's very important for me to actually get a C, because if I don't do it, I can get stuck on a BC.
Okay, very interesting, very interesting. So the key there, it's your secret to a C. Maybe you are saying that I've been stuck on a BC. What am I missing? Maybe the answer is that what? Maybe the answer is that you are missing document 1. Okay, I see a response of saying it helps to filter through to the PRI triggers. I consider it when preparing for the triggers in all other documents. Okay, so it's considered in tackling the triggers in other documents. It assists with the background industry research of the company. How so? How does it do that? Is there anything that you are expecting that will necessarily be of assistance there? Shumani, I use it to understand the business model and the 6 capitals that the entity has. Right, so the concept of 6 capitals is coming through. Okay, why is that important for a company to consider the 6 capital? How do they impact, say, an accounting task? How do they impact, say, a math audit task? It helps with understanding the industries, the laws and regulation, the competitive environment. This helps to understand where the entity is, where it wants to be, and what strategy they can implement. Thank you for that. To keep it simple is to identify the business risks. Okay, then linking info to questions asked and the research on specific triggers and whether the company is compliant with X and other related standards. If listed, then helps you know requirements and are they compliant. I also want to know the industry. I also want to know the industry as it will have peculiar nuances, its legislative framework, and so on. Also, I need to know what is the reason of its existence, who is the company servicing, moreover, how is it making money? Okay, so it seems that there is some alignment in terms of what? In terms of the expectation. But it's now a matter of now, if we are sitting in the same group, are we really aligned in terms of what we want to then use document 1 for? Because now I see that T is saying document helps to contextualize my responses, which is what Wadzanai was saying to us, that to really move from that BC to a C, she needs document 1 because it really contextualizes the issues in the case study. And that's what makes this case study to be unique, because the case study, it's not a what? It's not just like a technical paper that you might have set for, because here you've been introduced to the case study before. So that means the expectation of contextualizing is critical. And therefore, it could be heightened, especially for a task like strategy task, math task, and in some cases, how you think about, say, on audit task, internal controls will really want you to understand the context. But I think that's where we are. And as I'm saying that there's quite a lot of alignment in terms of the expectation of document 1. So It's understanding the information, the industry, the context, SWOT analysis, keeping it in mind when doing the task. If they want to expand, could there be information that will assist with things like, does the entity have capacity? Do they have cash? Interesting. So it's all about that. And as I'm saying, all of us are there in terms of understanding what we expect from it. And I'll then want you to then take that away from what? From document 1. So when we unpack the tasks, show off to the different team members that you really work for this company, Lampros, and you understand that this cannot be a good idea because this is what we have stated, this is what we wanted to do, and so on and so on. But what then, it's also important because you are talking about understanding a business, understanding its business model. Now, someone can then say, all right, this might be just too high level terms for me. So are you saying that there are specific questions that I can really maybe ask before I see the case study? In other words, sitting today and all of us not knowing what SAICA is in store for us in 2 weeks' time, can we sit and say that regardless, this is the question that I'll ask about the company that they're giving me? Because what we should then understand is that we need to understand that the person who's preparing the case will then be operating from some framework. If they want us to understand the business, what do we expect for them not to leave out? Because that for me, it has always been the difficult question that I needed to answer. That this person who is preparing the case study, or this group of people preparing this case study, what is it as a minimum that they will have to help me understand in order for me to be able to contextualize my responses? So when I say that it helps me to understand the entity's business model, what are the elements of a business model that cannot be left out? Like, what is it? Do we all have the same understanding of a business model? If I say that the business model of company A is this, what are you going to identify as having not been addressed? What is missing in a business model? Is business model all about revenue? Is a business model all about the cost structure? Is it about profit? Is it about how the balance sheet looks like? Are all those things interconnected, or do I need to look at them separately? So what is it when we say it's a business model? Is it just really about where the company or the industry that it operates? If I say MTN, you are saying that it's a telecommunication industry, it's a telecommunications company. When we then say its business model, what do you then expect me to tell you? Do I have to give you the revenue split? Do I have to give you in which countries it operates? What is it essentially that we'll need to know as a minimum? Then we are also talking about what? We are also talking about the company strategies. So when we talk about the company strategies, how do we know that the company strategies are good strategies or not? Because one will then say that sometimes we work on hindsight. I know that something is good after I've seen the results. But now if I'm to assess it without the results, how do I know that this is a good strategy for this company or not? What if there is actually a possible task that will just be challenging me on what? On whether what the company has documented in the strategy doesn't make sense. So how do I then go about taking what I have, applying myself to it, and then being able to express a view on it? So as I'm saying that in terms of what we are expecting to take away from document one, we seem to be aligned. But now the question is, do we have a framework where now we are able to know whether the company we've chosen to work for in this instance, it's doing well or not? How do we go about doing that? So essentially, what this model tries to do, and if you are one of those that really are intrigued with going through financial statements of listed companies, you will say that some of the things that are here, you've seen the different companies talking about. When did they sit and realize that this is how, regardless of the business you're looking at, you need to think about a business? So this model, it's developed by the integrated reporting council, and they really have driven the thinking to say that each and every company, profit making or non-profit making, if it wants to add value to its stakeholders, it needs to think about its business in this particular manner. Such a bold statement, because we are saying that you are in airline, this is going to work. You are in healthcare, it's going to work. Hospitality, mining, this will then help you to tackle the problem, understand the problem from a business perspective, and be able to evaluate whether the strategies being put on the table make sense or not. And the reason why this model and also understanding document one, it's so critical, because I know that maybe somewhere along your journey, some of you may have resolved it. You might have found yourself saying what? Saying that I wrote so many points, but I didn't get so many credits for them. What did I miss? And you might then say, I said this, and I know that this is a relevant thing. Why is it not being considered as a credit in this particular context? Because it might not be something that affects the elements of value creation. If, in other words, you tell me things that don't really help me to enhance the value of my capital, then I'm still not bothered. You might just think I'm just ignoring or dismissing what you're saying, but the reality is that if it does not help me to move from the blue to the green, or to avoid moving from the blue to red, then I'm saying that I should not be bothered. So that means now, even as you devise your responses, you need to be hitting at at the areas where the entity is looking to create value or to extract value. We have seen a lot of companies under COVID-19, some of them doing well, some of them not doing so well. And when we reflect, we then find that it's really not just a matter of finance, but it could be a matter of, say, manufactured capital. How was it not being enhanced? And so on and so on. So this framework, it's saying that give me whatever business it's out there in the world, give me a day or two, then I might not understand the business, but I might have relevant questions that will help me to understand the business. Because I have a framework that helps me to ask the right questions. And asking the right questions, it's such a critical skill, because you don't have all the time in the world. You don't have the time to just be reading this without understanding or getting value from it. So this model right here, it then helps you to ask the right questions, and it helps you to then assess the completeness of information and allow you to start having views about the information that's there. So that even when you consider the practicality of some task, you then say, nah, well, from what you've told me, this is not likely. And if you give me and say it's an option to do, then I will not spend a lot of time before I what? Before I kill the idea off the table. So these are some of the things that I just want you to be mindful of that. So when we look, let's just have just our eyes on this. On one side, we've got 6 boxes or blocks: financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, social and relationship, and natural. Then on the other side, we've got them as well. Then in the middle, we then see some of those words that you guys were talking about. One, business model, it is in them. And then some of you were talking to us about strategy. Some of you were talking to us about what? About risks and opportunities. Some of you were talking to us about competitive environment, legislative environment, which will then be covered under external environment. So essentially, this is saying that whatever you can think about a business, it will find its way somewhere in this particular in this particular diagram here. So you might be saying that, no, but what about this, and so on and so on. Everything about a business, we can find where it needs to sit here. It then becomes a matter of how do we think about it in our journey of value creation. So now when, say, a strategy is put through and you have now come to understand the entity's business model, and now you are evaluating that strategy, it means that you can see that it goes through the risk and opportunities. So somewhere along the way, I want you to talk to me about the risk and opportunities. But for it to be a risk, it has to be a risk to what? It's a risk to what? Because it cannot just be a risk, right? Remember that for some, it could be a risk that it can rain tonight. For the others, that's an opportunity that they'll be able to maximize. So you will then need to contextualize some of these things. So that is that kind of thinking that is going around in circle. Then what it means that as you are busy thinking about a business, understanding and tackling whatever issues that it might be thinking about, one of the things that you might now start to realize is you will see also the purpose and the mission on top to say that everything has to feed back. External environment on top, saying that everything has to feed back. So that is why this method right here, it's really considered to be an integrated thinking model, because it recognizes that the 6 capital have to work together, sometimes in a trade-off manner and sometimes in a value enhancing manner, in order for the business to continue to be relevant. The weightings of the different capitals for different businesses can have an impact of what? Can have impact of their success or not. There are some businesses that if they lose some of their key personnel, then they are as good as been closing today. Some, if they experience a negative reputational damage, regardless of how super the team is, they will not be able to see what? The end of day. And that's really the kind of engagement that these capitals really then have with each other, with the business model, with the external environment, and they then talk about where are we in terms of the business on the other side. Are the capitals being enhanced? or are they being destroyed over time? Okay. So now to just then go into detail. So what this model is saying, it's saying that a business has got 6 capital that really found it, that really holds it together. We've got the financial capital. And as the name suggests, it is where probably our studies started from, where they told us that the objective of every company is to create wealth for shareholders. So what are then the elements that we are then thinking about? Because now we are getting into the mind of an examiner. We are saying that Saika, I don't know what you're putting together there, but I'm saying that you will need to consider the financial capital of that company. And whatever you give me, I'm going to start there. So here, this is now where we are now saying where is this company in terms of one, its financial structure? Because a company could actually be a super company. But if one, it struggles to get access to funding, then again, it might struggle to enhance the other capitals. If it is overly geared, it might struggle to enhance the other capitals and even the financial capital. And where is it from a profitability perspective? And if the profits are going up or they're going down, what is really driving that? Is it the revenues or is it effective cost management? Because again, if I'm sitting here, I can actually like what I am seeing because I'm seeing profits coming through and I've not stopped to wonder where are they coming from. If I don't consider how then the financial capital is enhanced, I might make a misinformed financial decision because a company could then be could have increased profitability because it has reduced its cost, but cost can only go so low. And that will then be a problem. From a revenue perspective, I could be excited that revenues have increased, but they could have increased because of the external environment of, say, COVID-19. Now that COVID-19 is gone, where is my revenue? So that's what we are really thinking about there to say that at the end of the day, the financial capital could be represented by the financial structure of the company, which will include the level of debt, the level of equity, and the level of cash. But those are really informed by what? By the other strategies of the company, how they're doing against their competitors, and so on and so on. But I want to know, how is the company doing from a revenue perspective, from a cost perspective, therefore profitability perspective? How are they doing from a cash generation perspective? How are they doing from a working capital perspective? How are they doing from a gearing perspective? So I'm saying that as I'm sitting here, I will expect then the examiners to answer that for me. So I'm saying that I've got a starting point. I want to know how is this company doing, so that if now I get a funding proposal, I'm not surprised. I saw that this company was stretched from a funding perspective. If I get an opportunity to invest in a project to enhance, say, my intellectual, human, and manufactured capital, then I'll say, no, this will not be achievable because the financial capital is stretched. So that is bubble number one. But as you can imagine, the financial capital is generally enhanced by, say, manufactured capital. For instance, I will need to have equipment, machinery to produce goods, sell them, and generate revenue in order to enhance my financial structure. So if I look at financial capital alone, and I don't go deep into saying that where is the investment of this company? Is it invested in long-term assets, PPE, goodwill, intangibles, and so on? Or is it invested in short-term capital? So that is now where I'm now trying to understand where is the manufactured capital. And manufactured capital, that's where now we are talking about those assets that are income generating and that an entity invests in order to further enhance the manufactured capital, as well as what? As well as the, what do you call it? As well as the financial capital. So PPE is what we are expecting under manufactured capital. And you'll then recognize that in some instances, which in the context of Lampros as well, it's a school. So now we can imagine that the buildings that they will need in order to deliver their programs, excuse me, will then be what? Will then be a significant part of their manufactured capital. But what does it mean when we say they have been enhanced or they have been what? Destroyed over time? Because now one will then say that in an environment where face-to-face is still an important part of it, that manufactured capital might be important. So I'll need to have a good understanding of it. If I'm to move to online, does this still the same manufactured capital, is it still relevant, or I need to change my thinking around it? Then intellectual. Intellectual, it's tempting to think that intellectual means human. So it's not just about how smart then the team is, the management team, the board, and so on. So the intellect there that we are looking at, we are looking as intellect in terms of intangibles, the trademarks that the company owns, the value of the brand, the innovation, the R&D kind of what kind of thinking is sitting in intellectual. So in some instances, intellectual capital, it's so significant. Think about pharmaceutical companies where they've got drugs that they will develop over a couple of years, just like we saw with COVID, and globally, they were about what? Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and so on, that they have those as their what? As their intellectual capital. And you might then be saying that, but you cannot develop intellectual capital if you don't have human capital. Very true. But I can give you, you cannot access human capital without financial capital. And still, if the people are there, but you cannot buy the equipment that are required for them to do research and also produce on a mass scale, that will also limit your what? Your opportunity to create value. So it just gets to show the integrated thinking of this capital, and which now moves us to the next block, which is human capital. Human capital, this is now your people, how you engage with them, and how what are their qualifications, their capabilities, their resilience, the culture of the organization, in terms of what? In terms of just driving the ability to attract or to what? To detract talent. So that is where you will then be interested in the human capital. So intellectual looks at just what? At the intellectual property of the company. Human now brings the people into the mix. Then the next one is a very interesting one, social and relationship. So social and relationship capital, it is something that has become so critical in the success of so many companies. And this is where now we see an entity's attitude towards, say, bribes, an entity's attitude towards government regulations, their access to some important people in what? In the industry, in government. So their relationship with communities. So this is one of the critical capitals that we are seeing nowadays. That in terms of how even people, human capital, choose the company to work for, they think about what is this company doing in its industry, in its community, what is it doing with, say, government in this particular space, with this particular group of people, and so on and so on. And then lastly is the natural capital. So the natural capital really talks about what? The resources that have got a finite life and how the entity engages with them. Is it contributing to, say, green economy? Is it contributing to green power generation, and so on and so on? How is its water usage? How does it then approach its manufacturing process and the emissions that it's emitting into the environment? So those are then the 6 capitals. So what I'm getting to now is that when you have a case study, and when you are trying to understand the business, for me, when you say you have now intimately understood what this business is all about, you are now saying that I know where it is. So when we come on Monday, I'll want you to then be experts in terms of where Lampros is sitting. So when we talk about revenue, I want you to then be able to see where it's currently sitting. How about its capital, its plans that it has? Will its balance sheet be able to support such? Its manufactured capital, where is it? What are its strategies and ambitions? What about its intellectual capital? Is it something that is significant to it? And what about the human capital? Does it have key people that I'm worried about? Or is it after, say, in a talent race, and so on and so on? But this, we are saying, they're the building blocks of any business. It is not always the case that the assessors will then touch on all the capitals. And it's not always that all the capitals will engage with each other in a similar manner as you might have seen it for a previous company. The capital, as we've said, there could be one bottleneck which is really undermining all the other capitals. Like, for instance, we've heard about SOEs where we are hearing that they've lost the CEO, the board has all resigned. And now you might be sitting there and saying that, but how are you going to then bring confidence to bring and build a capital structure? So that is how I would then want you to what? To just think about a business in the context of this particular element. So that's just the first leg of it. And how do you then read this particular diagram? So the idea is that a business, it's going to have strategies to enhance these capitals. So now it means now when you are sitting there, you are saying, Lampros, what is then your targets when it comes to financial capital? Do you have a target debt to equity ratio? Do you have an expected growth in earnings, and so on and so on? What about, say, from manufactured capital? So you will then see that an entity, when it talks about its strategies, you can really pinpoint them back to saying which capital are they looking to enhance. In some cases, it could be one strategy enhancing a number of them, but I'll want you to just then have this mind. And the idea is so that you intimately understand a business, because the other triggers are likely going to be happening in that circle that we're just going to talk about quite quickly. But does that make sense in terms of how you need to think about a business? Any question, any input? Okay. All right, so no questions. Then now approaching the middle circle. We are saying that if now I give you 100,000, I've now enhanced your financial capital. But what will that 100,000 be at the end of the year, at the end of 5 years? That will be determined by what you do in the cycle, in the circle there. Does that make sense? You start off with a financial capital of 100,000. And I'm saying that your objective is to enhance it. So if you are to enhance it, your work will be in the circle. Now, what do we mean? Firstly, what are you going to do with that 100,000? You need to get inputs. You need to get inputs. Inputs will be people. Inputs will be intellectual property, assets. You need to get them. Do you see that? Because those inputs have to be converted into outputs. So what if you then use it to hire someone? That person has to work and execute on your business model so that there is an output of, say, revenue. Do you understand? Which makes sense. I mean, business makes sense. It may be difficult, but it makes sense. Right? So now, why is it difficult if then it sounds so simple? I mean, go buy an asset, go hire people, then apply them to your business model, get outputs, which are then sales. So that is what? That is how it works. But where now do we find companies struggling? Where do we find companies doing it wrong? Why is it now that we find our economy in such a state as such? So it's because then these things that we are saying, it sounds simple. Unfortunately, it happens in a context. We'll want it to happen in a closed loop where we'll just go into the room, put money, convert it into more money, come out, and so on. But unfortunately, it happens in a context. And that's why the external environment is on top there. Because it's saying that you, in deciding on these inputs, before and after you acquire them, the external environment will have a big impact on your decision making. When we talk about external environment, what are we looking to understand? Some of you have already then unpacked it for us to say it's essentially the pastel and the potter's model. So before you decide to then buy something with your 100,000, you will need to then be of the view that there are customers out there. I don't know where. They're out there to do what? these customers are out there and they're looking for products. So there is one element of external environment, a customer. And these inputs, you need to acquire them from somewhere. Then there are suppliers of these inputs. And we know that the threats of suppliers is one of the 5 forces. And we also recognize that the suppliers and the customers, they are facing a particular economic environment. Then we're like, oh, the E in what? In pastel, that stands for economic. I cannot ignore it. Yes, I'm looking at a customer and I have to think about what? Whether the customer can afford or not. And you will then find that the context of Lampros, where they're telling you about what customers are doing and so on and so on, you'll then say, oh yes, they're actually telling me about the economic environment. Then my suppliers, they're also facing load shedding. So that's an E in terms of what? Of environmental consideration or of technology in consideration, because the electricity that we expect to be available is not readily available. There's load shedding once in a while and so on. So now we are saying that technology infrastructure has an impact on the inputs that we buy. And then we are also mindful that it's not us alone that are interested in this. They could be out there in the external environment, competitors. They could be also what other prospective competitors, which are the threats of new entrants, that are interested in also acquiring these inputs that you're acquiring. But do you see that all those things that we are talking about are really linked to the cycle of, let's start with the inputs. So you can just imagine that this model, you don't need to force them in. They will naturally fit. So don't force them in. In other words, don't then go out and do some extensive pastel and so on and so on, when the information before you is leading you to a particular what? To a particular element. Because if you think about it, pastel will want you to then come up with, is it 6? P-E-S-T-E-L, 6. And Potters will want you to come up with about 5. So those are 11 considerations. And in some instances, 11 will be too much for 5 days. But you might find that the assessors or the examiners might have liked 1, 2, 3, and you might find that they've really hit on this quite in a lot of detail. That could be a hint that maybe that's where my focus is. But can I just ignore the other elements? Asking a question about it might be noteworthy. But even if you go back to the history of APC, you will not find that all the elements are then hit or are then being a core of focus. Because in some instances, and depending on the business is, competition might be the greatest threat. Like, look at COVID. COVID at that point, some businesses may not have been worried about what? Competition. They might have been worried about their customers surviving and doing what? And being able to therefore survive with them. So those could then have been some of their key consideration. That today we don't care what competitor is doing. We want to just make sure we support our customer to the best of our ability so that they survive and continue to economically partner with us. So those are some of the things that one will then consider. And you might find that a case study is then just focusing on 1 or 2 of those elements. And again, when you look at Lampros, you'll then see that there were things that they've mentioned, the way they mentioned that, oh, by the way, we need to be accredited with the Department of Higher Education. and we have been operating from 1985. So now if you then tell me you're going to do an extensive analysis of the legal framework, I was saying, it can't be. I mean, they've been here from then, so many years then. So what could they have missed now that you're saying that this could possibly be what? Could be a task. So from that kind of situation, it could be what? It could be that, yes, schools are regulated, but I don't see this being a big issue for this company. But now we've got things like what? We've got things like the Companies Act, which remain relevant, which is always an issue. And if now we are now being introduced with these particular elements, it could be that maybe that's where the L is sitting today. So those are the kind of things that you just need to be what? To be mindful of. But you could then challenge and probe why something is available to you there. And those are the kind of what? The kind of thinking that I just want you to be mindful of. Then taking it a step down, inputs, as much as we want to acquire inputs, there are inputs that we might not be interested to acquire because they just don't fit in with our purpose, mission, and vision. So that means as we are busy reading the case study, document 1, we'll want to understand what is this company looking to do? What are its values? And therefore, how then do different decisions fit in to those particular values? Because if they're inconsistent, then it could be a problem. And it might be difficult for an entity to enhance value through the inputs that they've what? They've just acquired. So that is a key consideration as well. So you'll then find that they'll give you the purpose, mission, vision, all of them or some of them, so that you can better contextualize where the company is at. Risk and opportunities. So as I said, when we talk about risk and opportunities, it's a matter of risks to what? Because if you don't think about it that way, you will give me a what? You'll then give me risks that are not significant for me. And risks that are not significant to a company, it could be that they can be easily resolved in a relatively short period of time. It could be that if they occur, then there is no what? There is no fundamental damage. And sometimes I find that candidates just think about issues and then raise them without due consideration of the context. So in this particular instance, as I'm saying, firstly, when we think about risk, we are saying that for them to be strategic, for them to be concerning to the board, they need to have or stand to undermine a significant part of a business. Then they also need to take time to resolve, or almost impossible to resolve, such that they need to be transferred to someone, such that we need to exit a particular market. That's the kind of risks and opportunities we are talking about. The opportunities that if we take them, the way our capitals will look next year or in 5 years' time will be significantly different. So this is what, this is very, very interesting. And when you think about it, think about which capital are they threatening? Are they threatening my financial capital? Are they threatening my manufactured capital? And so on and so on. If you are struggling to link it to any of those, then maybe you need to stop and say, is this really a risk? Because I really don't see how it is a risk and something to present to the board if it is not going to be hitting any of those 6 capitals? In other words, why should the board care about this risk? I mean, we've been seeing quite a lot of quite a lot of interesting elements in the news, just around also, what is it? The guys that were involved in that SARS saga, I think it's Bain, yes. Is it Bain? Yes, I think it's Bain. In terms of just where now the social and relationship capital was undermined at the expense of financial capital, when now the revenues were generated, but they were being generated at the expense of key relationships, where now they've been banned from from trading with governments of the UK and the South African one for a number of years. And it now means that some of the private clients might start writing letters to them that show we've got key relationships with government, and this relationship that we have with you might no longer work. And it's those kind of things where we're saying that was that part of their risk analysis? Because clearly this is now hitting their social and relationship capital to an extent that it is significantly undermining their financial capital. And that's why I'm saying that always be mindful of the capitals, meaning that essentially when you are sitting there and you've got a risk question, I will expect you to be very excited, because you will have then seen the financial or the different capitals of the company, and therefore the risks to them are likely to be the things that you'll want to raise. And even from an opportunity to say missed opportunities with regards to to enhancing the capital, it's something that is not with. Then strategy and resource allocation. Once I've understood the extent of my risks and my opportunities, I'll really want to do to allocate resources. Do we have a compliance officer? So a compliance officer is a human capital, but that human capital has to be funded in terms of budget and salaries. So that's when we talk about resource allocation. Do we have time to be wasting on this? Why do we want to do this? That's where we'll then ask about such things under Under strategy and resource allocation. Does this make sense? Is it suitable? Does it contribute to where we want to go? And the outlook, how is the outlook looking? If we invest in this, where do we see the world in the next 5 years? Will people be still consuming streaming, the likes of DSTV sports, in the same way that they're consuming this ad? So we take a view in terms of where the business is sitting. And I mean, again, in Lampros, they were presented as making some of key decisions under COVID. And one will need to then say that, are you making these decisions now with a different outlook? Does it make sense? So now when the assessors or examiners then says to you, with regards to this investment, give us other key factors that the company will need to think about. Then you are like thinking that, oh yes, in addition to risk and opportunities, I need to be thinking about outlook. And performance simply says there's an opportunity to reflect how are we doing in terms of the targets that we've put across. And all these things are then put together or held together by the entity's governance structures, the board, where we see that if the board is not strengthened in terms of diversity, in terms of just diversity of skill, diversity of experience, business acumen, legal, and so on. Decisions that are effective are difficult to make. And another one around governance is just around what we keep hearing about what? Glencore. Very interesting revelations in terms of the fact that, what do you call it? The head of ethics is somewhat implicated in being one of the key individuals that used to carry briefcases around with cash so that they can facilitate whatever payments that they need to facilitate. But I mean, from a governance perspective, this is someone who is a senior executive of ethics. And now they are saying that they were the ones leading that. And you're like, from a governance perspective, it means that what? It means that the entire structure, from a strategy perspective, from a risk perspective, I mean, this is something that it's very difficult to see how it was not endorsed into what? Into the entire company. And that's where we usually talk about the tone at the top. So that's why governance in itself is standing on the blue line. Because with regards to each and every decision, resource allocation, outlook, performance, risk and opportunities, governance has to be at the heart of it. And once we have what? Once we have gotten the inputs that we desired, process them through our business activity. Business activity, this is now where we're saying, if you tell me what is then Lampros doing in this instance? It teaches. It's a school. Okay, what type of school? How does it do it? Is it online? Is it face-to-face? Is it so on and so on? So those will then be sitting under what? Business activities. But what I want you to also see is that business model is just one part of it. Do you see where business model fits in? It's just one part of it. The other elements are really what drives what we call then business acumen. When we talk about risk, risk is just one side of things. So when you approach this document one after this session, I'll want you to just wear this value creation hat and just simply say, let me break down this what? Let me break down this business. Let me understand it. And before I talk to Google and its friends there in terms of this research and looking, this is supposed to help you ask the questions. Because only when you have the right questions, it's where I'll then suggest open Google. Because essentially, if you are sitting and you then see that the company is in this industry and you Google, you are missing the point. The point is understand the business first based on what they do and using frameworks such as this. So this is just one such framework. But the idea, because it's an integrated framework, you might be thinking that pastel potters, they're sitting in what? External environment. Then some are just either just going to look at just the strategy and they are not as robust as this. So this is a very robust model. And I'll therefore want you to then say, I want to analyze this business using this model, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 capital, tick. I see them coming through. Yes, yes, yes. But now, what are the risks to those capital? Now, I'm back. I'm thinking about the risk. Oh, what are the strategies? How do they talk to the risk and opportunities? And how do they enhance those 6 capital? Oh, yes, you've said you want to do this, you want to do that. Good. What about your mission, vision, as well as what as purpose? Where are they? What are some of the conflicting elements in your strategy, risk and inputs? Oh, yes, this doesn't sound good, so on and so on. So that is the kind of thinking that I'll then want you to have. Then whenever you are stuck, you are then saying, let me now start using Google. So Google should not be your primary. It should not be a matter of when I get a company, I want to see if it's listed or not. What if it's not listed? Excuse me. What if it's not listed? It means that you'll need to do what? It means that you'll need to come back somewhere. Not that you have to go somewhere and get the info. You have to come back somewhere and say, I know it's not listed, but let me just think through about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Does that make sense? Okay. I see questions. How long should we spend on this during pre-release? How long should we spend? It's a very interesting question to say how long. Some businesses are generally easier to understand. Some outlines are also generally easier to understand. As you're busy reading, you could see all these kind of issues coming together, because sometimes they go through the detail of the manufacturing process. And you can then say, oh, yes, I see the inputs, I see how the manufacturing environment is, and how so on and so on and so on is. So that could also have an impact. And sometimes just saying how common is it for you can also have a matter of time impact. But I think what I just then want you to get to is where now you are saying that I've got this business. That's number one. So I've got this business. This is what this business 6 capital is all about. This is what these are its strategies, these are its risk, and so on. So now the moment you touch on document 2, you are then saying that in the context of all those things. But it should not be a matter of you are now surprised about what this company is trying to do here. Because for me, then it might show a disconnect. When now we are saying, oh, hold on, why is this company thinking of saying buying another school? Yes, we are thinking valuation and so on, but does it make sense in the context of all this? Okay, if it doesn't, then how does it influence those so on and so on? So as everybody was saying, or majority was saying earlier today, it's about building the context. So if you are finding that you are reading the case study and things are still not making sense, you are still finding that things are disconnected, then maybe you need to go back and just make sure that you understand this. Because remember the assessment, as I was saying, it's all about contextualizing. So if you are trying to contextualize some of the decisions, some of the tasks, you will really need to understand where are they coming from. And that could go a long way. So here, the case, this is one of the beautiful case studies because it really then builds on some of the context. Like for instance, it builds, but no, let me not spoil it for you. We will see as you go through it, the pre-release and so on, that some of the things that are coming through, you might find that maybe you're gonna spend, let's say, 2 to say 5 hours on the pre-release, and you have some of the initial questions, and you have some of the categorization of the issues, and you've got some of the issues and starting to see why this company is better than the other. Why is it standing out? Why is its model superior? And why is it inferior? And so on. Those could have been already answered. Then it will be a matter of what do you then do with that information for the rest of the tasks. So there is not, for me, essentially, any standard time. It will depend on how many questions you have. If you're finding yourself that you're answering these questions based on what you have or what you know, then that's very good. But if you have more questions than not, then you will likely be saying, let me just Google this and make sure I understand how this really works. Then, should the entity have all the 6 capital in function? Not so. Not so. Because you might say, I work for what? I work for an audit company. Audit company, you might then say human capital on top of the list. In terms of its branding and so on, intellectual capital, great. Social and relationship, you deal with clients on a regular basis, so that's another significant capital. Manufactured capital, do they need buildings? Is there any strategic consideration with regards to these buildings? Are there any strategic consideration with these laptops? I mean, laptops are just fast. Probably that's what we need. So it's not like, then what? It's not like then manufactured capital will be a big deal for them. Then what about natural capital? Natural capital, you guys just drive to, say, an audit client, work and go home. So what might be some of the consideration, as much as they might contribute to, say, conversation, thinking, but in terms of how the capitals engage with the business, it could be in a very limited manner. Maybe they're saying that the way we have now structured engagements is that you come 3 days per week, you then reduce emission. That could be just, it looks good, but it's not like, say, a PPC. It's not like, say, an Anglo and so on that have got a big risk when it comes to what? To that kind of capital. So that's how then some of the capitals may engage with the business. There are some that will always be there, that they will say, we need to get that right. Like human capital, as I was saying, for an audit firm, it's such critical. That's why they invest probably so much into graduate recruitment, going to universities, and having, say, functional training programs and so on and so on. So that might be just how they think about their business and how to create value. The software, now that the information is just piling up, a lot of companies have digitized, so investing, say, in bespoke audit software or investing in such might be on top of their list. So that's how one will then imagine how the different capitals engage together. Make sense? Any other question? Okay. So that is it. So that will be what we will stop tonight, and we'll therefore park it here. So the next step is take this thinking, go look at document 1 for Lampros. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to share my view. And at that point, I want it to be a comparison. So you will be comparing what you are doing and how you are using this framework against what is in them. And the quality, you might need to assess it by saying what additional questions you had. because the quality of the questions means that what? Means that you are now going from there to do more research or structured research. Because if we just say that, sure, I've read this and I don't know what this company do. Now let me say schools in Zimbabwe, then you've missed the point. You should be then typing your question and saying, what are the issues? 1, 2, 3. So specific, the more specific you are, the more you are getting the process right. Meaning that even if someone gives you a whole bunch of research, you can then ask, did you cover 1, 2, 3? Then your research is not going to be useful to me. So it will give you that confidence. So that's how I want you to do it. I want you to think about this and apply your minds to it when we unpack the document 1. But I want us to be experts. Come next week when the lecturers, so I won't tell them about this. I'll just want them to just be pleasantly surprised to say, sure, yeah, you guys know this thing. You guys have spent a good deal of time and you understand where these issues are coming from, especially with that strategy question. Very interesting one. Okay. That is all from my side. So the document, we'll upload it, right? So it will be uploaded along with the video. So the videos are generally uploaded, say by 11 the following day. So this will be there by tomorrow morning. What is your view on consulting the annual reports of the respective? So on consulting, before we wrap it up, on consulting the annual reports, for me, it's all about the have questions that you're looking at. Because an annual report, it's about, say, sometimes a good 100 pages. So when you say download and it opens, where are you going? Are you going and saying that you are going to confirm the risk that you've already identified based on what you've read? If that's the case, then well done. But if you're saying that I'm just going to read and see what's in here, then it might be a problem. But I want you to then be working on a structured approach to say, what is it that I'm going to take away? Because otherwise you might find yourself investing too much time into it. So it is scary at times, and it feels very courageous. But essentially, I'll then want you to do it. I'll want you to just take I'll want you to just take that into consideration in terms of how you can be as effective as possible. Right, so Nelisa is saying it's very eye-opening. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the structure. My key takeout is just one word: context. 100%. 100. Hi.
Yes, hi. Hi everyone. I just want to ask a question, or I want to confirm something. So the story of value creation and the 6 capital, I've heard it before, but some of the things I think they're making sense now as you're explaining them. And based on what you're saying that this is what one should use to understand the business, right? So as I'm reading the case study, like some of the things would be answered. Like, for instance, you can see in terms of human, the people that they have. So in areas where I can't see, like for instance, risk, as I'm reading the information, the document 1, I can't see some of the things. Is that now where I need to go and start sort of like maybe listing what the risks are? How should I go about it?
So yeah, an interesting question. So for me, it'll be a matter of, firstly, have a view that you want to be challenged, right? So in other words, as you've identified some of the elements, you might say that, oh, there are these people that have been introduced to me. Are they key? And if they're key, is there a risk of losing them? Then I'll then want to understand, are they shareholders? So if they're shareholders, then I'm not so much worried about them leaving. Then I might also then say, oh, but if they have been with the company and they're shareholders and they might not likely leave, they might be what? They might just pass. That's the reality. So the risk of losing key, employees might be what? Or key personnel might be also a consideration. But it will then depend again on context. The person has been with the company for a number of years, and the company maybe has been painted to hold, say, a key position, and so on and so on. So that could then be your starting point. And you might then say that even before I go, have I considered, say, risk and say, from an intellectual perspective, from a social and relationship perspective, from manufactured from a financial, where now it might prompt you to say, I might not have looked at, say, their cash position quite closely. I might not have looked at their gearing quite closely. So now I'm worried that they've got so much debt. Now I'm worried that they've got legal cash. Now I'm worried. So for me, it's always that kind of challenging challenging the initial position. But I'll not want you to start and say you don't, say, have a view on something. I'll want you to just first challenge yourself, and by doing so, your business acumen, to say that, this, it's what? It's something that I might need probably to find out more on. Why? Because I believe I've got a concern. Then now you open, say, that annual report, and you find that they're not talking about it. Then it might give you an opportunity to say, my question, why did I consider this to be an issue? And why a similar business as this is not raising it? Could I be missing it? Could they be missing it? And those are some of the questions that maybe are to be confirmed with the team. But at least always start with a view. That's where I'm coming from. Have a view as you kick off the process. Okay. All right. I don't see any other question. So just to confirm, the structure is for document 1. Yes, we're talking about document 1. The reflection videos, yes, the reflection videos are not classes, so you don't need to schedule a time. So they will just be posted online and a notification will be sent out. All right. I think we can pack it then. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to hearing your engagement. So let's talk in the WhatsApp group. I just want to see where you are and how everything else is going. Thank you very much and have a good evening.